Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to have to move. I've been told I'm not allowed to move past this line here. So all you people over there, I'm projecting. Because normally I would walk across the stage. But okay, so okay. Go back one. I wanted to show you a picture of the Chinese University of Hong Kong so that you know that Hong Kong is not just shopping malls. It is a mountain, so you walk up and down just like you do at NUS, so you'd feel very much at home if you were to come to Chinese U. I must give acknowledgement that what I'm talking about today is already published in a paper that's available online. I'm hoping that these slides will be put somewhere online so that all the references you can access if you so desire. Let me just show you this bit though, just to start. You see the C, the L, the E, the A and the R? It is the most unclear logo for clear. I did not design it, and it's always slightly irritated me. But one of the things about the wonderful acronym we have for our centre is this word research. And I passionately believe that unless we continue to do innovation in teaching and learning together with research on its genuine effectiveness, we're not going to get anywhere. Otherwise, we're just playing in a sandpit. So one of the things that I like about CLEAR is that all of our projects have evaluation strategies. All of them, almost all of them, end up in publication in one form or another and are hence accessible to the wider community. And I guess I made a comment in the last session I was in on some very interesting work that I really hope they do the same. You see these great presentations in conferences, and I want to get them out there and internationally discussed. Or else we just keep reinventing the world in various parts of the world. Okay, now what am I supposed to be talking about? I'm supposed to be talking about digital natives and digital learners, and that I will indeed talk about. Whoops. I've got this terrible gadget. Anyway. It's a new piece of technology that I've only just been introduced to. Now, my role is to stir things up a bit, and I hope I'm going to be slightly contentious because, there is time for Q&A, and I want people to actually come up with, no, you're wrong, Carmel, type questions, and that would be really nice. So we really need to sort of get underneath the iceberg and see whether we've got underlying assumptions, particularly about the nature of our learners, and I think about the nature of our teachers. And certainly I'm going to tell you the story of Chinese University and the contradictions and I think complexities that exist there. The outline, I'll have a few preliminary comments. I'll talk a little bit about what's happening in Hong Kong because it's not very far away. So for many people in this room, this may be of interest. I'll then talk about the three themes. I think there is a myth about the digital immigrant, digital native divide. I think we need to address that now. I'll talk about the difference between digital natives and digital learners. And in particular, I want to talk about the difference in learning design between accessing information and the sorts of things one might do that end up with dialogue, and what students' perceptions are about that. Then finally finish up with some bits and pieces. I'd like to comment on the Horizon Report. How many people have read the Horizon Report? Okay, must read homework. The Horizon Report comes out from the New Media Consortium somewhere in America, and it's an annual report that scans the horizon about media. And it's quite interesting to read it over time on what are the critical challenges that are happening in higher education. There's a sort of blur between higher education and media in higher education. And then at the end of this talk, I'll talk about what their predictions are for the sort of technologies that are really emerging. But always, for the last few years, it's been digital media literacy that what our students need as graduates and what we need as teachers are a number of literacies around the use of digital media. That is inevitably and inextricably part of the 21st century. And that our learning, our teaching and learning environments need to really be designed with that in mind. Me as a researcher, that I think we are, sadly, while I've just made a comment about publishing, because I believe in the community of scholars, the fact that the way in which journals are ranked as A's and B's and C's and the way that impacts on people's careers is actually really problematic. The difference between open access journals, open source journals, commercial journals and so on. There's a real problem about publishing and metrics of evaluation of research and so on. And that's seen, it's very interesting, that's seen as in a media report as being something that is an inhibitor. Competition in universities. We're in a nice research-intensive, I won't call you traditional, but a nice research-intensive university. There's a lot of competition out there in the rest of the world for other models of higher education. And then just simply keeping up. It's just really hard. So these are the sorts of challenges that we're facing when we try and talk about the nature of our students and the nature of the sorts of experiences that they ought to be engaged in. This one, these are the sorts of literacies that I think our students need. We're comfortable with written literacy, but media, linguistic literacy, global literacy, visual literacy, cultural literacy, etc. And in fact, this morning's lovely session with the students was very much talking about looking at a number of those literacies together in terms of cultural experience on this campus. And so keep this in mind, that this is what we should be trying to help our students feel comfortable with, which means we need to be comfortable as well. I can remember, in fact I think most of you can, but you might have been children, when the web first came along. It's not so very long ago. I can remember sending my first email in the early 90s. And in those days, it was a repository, you got some published content. And there were maybe about 45 million users in the mid-90s. It has moved now through the sort of Web 2 world, where we're beginning to get user-generated content into whatever Web 3 means, and I'm not sure what that actually means, but it's certainly a much more complicated and personalized web. So in other words, when Amazon tells you that when you buy a book, that these are the other books that, that people have bought, they're personalizing the web for you. So in some ways, you are seeing only a fraction of the web at certain times. But you're getting this responsive, interactive, semantic sort of web that's operating these days. And that's going to actually make a huge difference to what is meant by the nature of the web. And I think that sort of need for understanding is not going to go down, it's going to go up. We're going to be in a sort of grasping at what's coming at us sort of feeling. I mean, I understand most of our teaching, most learning management systems are sort of Web 1. They're a contained container into which teachers put materials, activities for students. It's structured, it's contained. It's not, in any sense, this much more interconnected, free-floating world that I think is actually coming to us. Right. Media. I can remember, in fact, I had a job as a multimedia designer for a while, and it was really cool. And this was a nice time around about here. We had lots of interest in really interesting uses of media. Email was not yet a curse, and life was simple and exciting. We then got the learning management systems and the web, quite frankly, caused a problem with media because of bandwidth. And now that's sort of solved and it's gone up again. Email's become an unmitigated curse in life. How many email messages have you answered today? Right. But what has happened is this rise of other technologies, huge numbers of technologies that are just rising up, and then social media, which I've just separated out a little bit. That, you know, this is, I don't know whether that's going to plateau. And this is purely an image. It's not a quantitative picture at all. So this is the world in which we are. However, we're also in a very complicated world, and I really like this quote from Friesen that talks about e-learning, whatever e-learning is, but I don't want to get into semantics, but it's interdisciplinary, has interconnections, it's multidisciplinary, and it's got multiplicity of differences. And so research, there was a little discussion again in the last session about the fact that you can only do research if you have an experimental control group. To which I said, no. So we need to look at whole different ways in which we collect evidence about student learning in these new environments and these changing, emerging environments. So you can't even track cohort, 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 because it will change during that time. So we need to be thinking really smart about how we get evidence about what's happening with student learning. A few words about Hong Kong, just so you understand the context. Education reform in Hong Kong started maybe about 30 years ago, so it's a long process. But it's the curriculum in the schools, which is still quite defined, has been changing year by year for the last 12, 13 years. And next year, it literally hits the universities. And we will change from mostly three or four, but mostly 3-year undergraduate degree to a 4-year undergraduate degree, because the senior secondary is now 1 year less. But that means that at September 2012, there'll be 2 cohorts of students, because there'll be one cohort that comes from the old secondary 7 curriculum, and one cohort that comes from the new secondary 6 curriculum. The secondary 7 curriculum students will go into a 3-year degree, mostly, and the secondary 7 will go into a 4-year degree. And all of this has to be managed together. So it really is a very complex time in Hong Kong, but it's been an opportunity to actually rethink the nature of university curriculum. Now, while there are a lot of boundaries and constraints around that, it has been an exciting time to actually have every single undergraduate program in the university, all universities in Hong Kong, go through a new process of being approved and organized and so on. The extra year means that there's much more opportunity for language support, for general education, experiential learning, that sort of stuff, in order to try and genuinely enable our graduates to go out with those literacies that I've just talked about. So the aims of educational reform in Hong Kong are just fantastic. I suspect the implementation has been a bit too hurried, even though I'm saying it's been going on for a long time. But it is an opportunity, so sort of watch the space of what's happening, because there will be quite a lot of oversight of what's happening in Hong Kong that I think will be interesting both regionally and globally, to see whether or not you can, and it is literally, engineer a new curriculum in a fast-changing world to actually have these broad aims of giving students all of these digital literacies, as well as other literacies. It is meant, as I said, it's outcomes-based approach, but not in a reductionist sense, in a sense of graduate capabilities. Much more emphasis, which is needed, particularly on communication skills and critical thinking. And I think that really is seriously a major topic, which is very refreshing. And we, again, in light of this morning, much more discussion about internationalization and experiential learning, but it is Hong Kong, and there is then some tension between the Chineseness and Chinese language and the 2 Chinese languages and so on. So it's a complex. If anyone's a sort of cultural anthropologist, then zoom off to Hong Kong. It's going to be a field day for the next few years. Really interesting terrain to think about, which of course brings some challenges. Okay, now what I really want to do is to give you the research from our university on both students and teachers, largely perception. I won't have so much assessment data, but I'll be looking at largely their perceptions of teaching and learning and e-learning. But I've got to show you this picture. Now, how old do you think they look? 12? They're actually university graduates. Now, I know young Chinese folk look young, but as I get older, they get younger, I'm sure of it. But I keep this picture to actually remind myself that this is the future. It's not us oldies, it's these young people. I also like to show this person. If you look at the references, you'll see a great number of Mcnaught and Lamb, or Lamb and Mcnaught. Paul Lamb works in CLIA and is a fabulous researcher in this area. All right, now I'm going to talk about 5 different studies and trying to look across them in some ways. And these are bits and pieces, either they came as a part of a grant, or some of them are quite well-funded, large projects, and others are small projects that emerged out of particular needs. Briefly describe them, and then I'll just cherry-pick some of the findings from them. The Digital Native Study is a study that is based on an Australian-wide study of students' use of technology. But, it's only about 3 years old, but I suspect it's way out of date. It's published in 2008, but we got the data towards the end of 2009. We got the data in 2007. It's way out of date. And the Australian study is even a bit before that. But what we were trying to do is to get a quite detailed look at what technology students use and what they use them for. So, and again, our results in Hong Kong are, if anything, students are more digitally equipped than they are in Australia. There have been similar studies in the UK, so that was that study. This one is, I think, more interesting. We tried to look specifically at the design of course websites and the relationship to students' perceptions of their learning. And I'll talk quite a bit about that one. And that's about 600 students across 20 courses in Hong Kong. This is a small study in business, which involved a number of focus groups. And it was about the faculty trying to develop its own, the Faculty of Business Administration developing its own sort of faculty-based strategy. And so we did a number of focus groups with students to try and dig down to what sorts of things they thought would be supportive for learning. So it's quite a small study, but again, I'll show I think it's useful. This one is a study we did right across Chinese U to look at, again, what students were actually using in the way of technology for learning. The Digital Native Study is technology use. This is technology for learning, which is a bit different. And then we actually had a look, and this is really, I am going to bare the institutional soul to you when I actually show you what our university actually uses in the way of technology, what the teachers provide for students. So we've got a number of bits of data about what students want, what students already have in the way of technology, what experiences they've had with e-learning, and we look institutionally at what the university, what teachers right across the university use. So I'll sort of mix and match that. And the reason I do it is that I'm calling this a soft form of meta-analysis. Meta-analytic studies are quite rigorous and complicated and statistical and have large numbers and so on. I'm trying to say that I think there's another form of meta-analysis, which is where you take individual studies which bear some relationship to each other, and then you say, so what does all this mean? And I think we need to do more of that. So, in other words, that when you have a conference proceedings, there's somebody, and it's not an easy task, who actually says, so what does this mean? what's the overall messages from the number of studies that are happening at this place and time. So I sort of recommend that sort of thinking to people, that this is where I think we will mature the field, instead of this is what I did in my class and this is what I did in my class. What would it mean institutionally or nationally or globally for that? So that's my reason for doing it. Now I'm going to call this the myth of the teacher-student digital gap. I am a digital immigrant, but remember Prensky wrote his digital native digital immigrant paper in 2001. That's over a decade ago. And also his paper it's elegant, it's lovely. If you haven't read it, then find it, it's online, and read it. But it is his viewpoints, it is not a research study. And I think it sparks some really useful and very helpful thinking, but I don't think our teachers are on the whole, quite so digitally immature as perhaps they were a decade ago. And certainly in Hong Kong, that's true. Certainly our students have got more, use technology a bit more than the teachers. And I'll come back to the bit whether it's for learning or not. But our evidence is that teachers are really, they've got the stuff as well. So this diagram, this is there are statistical differences between them, but I don't think they're that important. You can see that this one here, actually teachers use simple web functions more than students. And now this data is a couple of years ago. Remember, I said it's probably out of date now. There's not much difference in management of personal data and multimedia files. Mobile functions, yes, the students use it more, but I'm not sure that that's quite so true. There is in social features and games, there's much bigger difference. But it's not like you've got two worlds any longer. You've got a bit more of one and a bit more of another. So I don't think, and when, it's not on this slide, but if you find out what sort of computers, teachers have higher end computers. So we actually have more digital power, if you like, than the students, or we had. So I think we've got over this one now. I think teachers have got tools. They may not be quite as good as the students, and that's probably true in some ways, but it's not like they don't know anything and the students have got an absolute difference. I think there is still something in the way in which the technology is used. This comment here, our business study, the students definitely wanted technology, but they were very pragmatic. It's Hong Kong, okay? It's like Singapore, I guess. That in this particular study, our business students were saying that a link to better grades was a requirement for getting engaged. They were really pragmatic about it. But I think the reality is a bit more complex than that. But we have very pragmatic students. However, if assessment is going to drive it, then they're quite well disposed. That was that small study. Now, this is a more interesting study. This is about 600 students who were in courses where the teachers were using technology more than just notes and PowerPoints. In other words, these were quite nice learning designs where there were interactive online exercises. There was stuff that linked what was happening in the classroom to what was happening outside and so on. And they're actually having a good experience. I picked our 20 or 21, I think it is, best e-teachers, if you like. And we then tried to find out what was happening. Now, all of these teachers were teachers who I knew had courses that were well appreciated by students. They got good results in terms of learning and so on. So we wanted to find out from the students what it was that they appreciated. And I'll just give you the survey data at this point. If you look at the responses to questions about the design of the website, then the features of the website that related to information, which were about, stuff you could get on the website, really didn't correlate in a factor analytic model with what you'd see in terms of really interactive features. In other words, if you had lots of information, you may not get lots of interaction and vice versa, although there was always some in all of these websites. So what I'm saying is that this doesn't mean that there's a relationship in students' perception between the frequency and the quality of the information and the frequency and the quality of the constructive dialogue. Now, I'll come back to that, but just remember it's a big red cross, okay? However, if you just ask students about learning, not about the website, there is a clear relationship between taking a deep approach to learning, being well motivated, feeling that they're getting good communication skills and group work skills, and developing a range of conceptual cognitive understandings. Okay, so that all works together, and that's what you'd expect. That you know, that in terms of learning, there's a relationship between approaches to learning and these types of learning outcomes. Now, what we were trying to do was to find out whether or not which parts of the design of the website work together with learning outcomes. So in other words, did students find that having access to good information supported their learning? Or did they find that having access to constructive activities supported their learning? Or was there no correlation at all? And what we found in a structural occasion model is this, that there is a clear relationship between the students' perceptions, remember, of the sorts of design features on a website that were about constructive dialogue and the sorts of learning outcomes that we would want to find. There was no relationship between access to high quality, good information and the development of appropriate learning outcomes. So lots and lots of information. It may have a convenience factor, I'm not saying that, but there is, in this study, absolutely no evidence that it relates to students' learning outcomes. I think that's quite powerful. We need more studies like that to say, what is it about what's happening in blended learning? And I'll get to what I think blended learning is in a minute, but what is it about blended learning that really supports learning? In students' views, who've had good experiences of e-learning, it's this stuff. It's getting together in the forum. It's having quizzes, simulations, etc. that feeds into learning. So keep that in mind. That's what the evidence is that we ought to be doing with our websites, is to have lots of use of interactive features if we're going to use e-learning at all. Okay, now let's have a look at the learning management system logs. What actually happens in my university, it's a very fine university, of course, I've got to keep saying that. Here's the actual data from looking at the websites, the centrally managed websites of our university. We have masses of stuff, so we have lots of information. Teachers spend a lot of time on notes and PowerPoints and what have you. And I'm not necessarily saying that's a bad thing, but when you look at other features like discussion forums and quizzes, it's very low, or it's relatively low. Now, it's much higher than it used to be, I might add, but it's still low. So that overall, the student body is not getting that experience. They're not getting that high interactivity. And I might comment that I had a real push in that particular academic year on quizzes. As people who came to my workshop know, I really think there's a lot we can do with formative, quiz-type activities online. I think they've got a really useful purpose. Push them, and everyone said, oh, yes, we'll do a quiz because Carmel said so, and I'll get rid of it that way. And so they did. However, the following year, it dropped, because I was onto some other little, hobby horse at that stage. So be really, my message there is that teachers, in order to actually decide to really begin to explore technologies, have to have a commitment that it's going to be worthwhile. So there's a mismatch between what our students say ought to be online and what we're actually providing. If I look at the move, oh, these gadgets are awful. Okay. All right. Okay. This is another study, which is, I hope it works later. Anyway, that looks at students. It's only 1,438 students, which is hardly our undergraduate population, but it does actually fit the Chinese university demographics, so I guess it's sort of some value. We asked students how much they use technology, which is the yellow, and then how useful they thought it was. Now, you can see my poor quizzes. But, you know, really, these are low numbers except for stuff like information and notes, all right? Yeah, they're just telling me what the logs told me. But in every case, the blue bar is higher. They are saying that we think it would be more useful. So we have this experience, which is quite limited, but we are well disposed to actually having more access to technology. And if you do a bit more on the stats on this, you find that students who've had a higher use of technology, like the ones I just mentioned in our 20 really nice courses, they are much better disposed. They are saying this will definitely support our learning, and you know, they really think it's a good thing. In fact, that's shown here that the frequency, both of their technology use themselves and their frequency of e-learning strategies is linked to seeing e-learning as useful and seeing that it's beneficial. And these are, you know, and there are a number of other studies in other places that it's not, the problem is not with the students. The problem about digital natives are not necessarily digital learners, but they are dead keen on becoming digital learners. Is the message that I've got. So what does all this mean? This means that we have implications for our learning designs. We need to think a little bit about that. And when you make a decision about teaching, these are the sorts of questions. You know, who are my students? Why am I teaching this? Et cetera, et cetera. They're the standard curriculum questions that we make. And I might add that getting feedback to students on their learning and getting feedback to teachers on students' learning is all sort of linked together. Sometimes we don't see that as being linked. But what we need to do, I think, is to think about blended learning as being something where the framework of teaching and learning is in the center, and then the sorts of things that will genuinely support that feature of curriculum design come on the outside. So that you know, we start thinking about student learning needs. We need to think about what we're trying to achieve in a course or a program. We think about learning activities, content, and assessment, and it's all, the arrows are interlinked. We collect lots of feedback. Assessment is a form of feedback, and we think about actual learning outcomes. Now, it seems that when we begin to look at learning design in this way, it's not about the technology per se, it's about the overall learning design. Having made those decisions, we then begin to think about what sorts of tools and strategies do you have that are appropriate. And that's when you bring the technology in. And it's appropriate. And I might add, from comments I made earlier today in sessions if you were there, I think the use of technology shouldn't be a duplication or an add-on. It should be working together. So if students are spending a lot of time online, they may not be spending as much time in the classroom face-to-face. So there are some quite hard decisions about that, about looking at the time that students are committed in an individual course. So it needs to be a sort of holistic thinking. And things like diagnostic testing. This is not a static thing. Things like blogs, e-portfolios, etc., are reflective spaces. These are not interactive. These are not passive. Peer reviews, tests, wikis for collaboration. We've heard this morning, I've heard today, papers on all of those things, discussions, quizzes, games, simulations, and so on. And they come in to support that particular learning at that particular time. Now, the only thing I've mentioned that may or may not be static is media-rich in explanations. I'm not saying that notes and PowerPoints aren't any good, but I am saying that most of the things that work well for student learning are things which are an interactive process. Okay, so we need to address these ideas now. Because I do think, certainly in Hong Kong, we are in for a few fascinating years. And change is ahead, but that's true globally. If I go back to my Horizon report, then it says that in the next year, e-books, how many people have read an e-book? How many people have not read an e-book? Okay, there's still a few, okay. So, but they're coming, okay? Obviously, everyone uses a mobile phone. Is there anyone in the audience who doesn't have a mobile phone? Okay, Daphne, right, okay, good, right. All right, so we have one now. I used to get an answer of 3 or 4, so we can have a chat. 1 year or less, they are going to become basically they're normal, not new technologies. 2 to 3 years, look at this, augmented reality and game-based learning. A few years ago on the Horizon report, that was down in the 4 to 5 plus category. It's moving up. That they are there now as options. And, if you're not, and this is where we may start to get, I think, a little bit again of a digital native, digital immigrant thing may come back again. On the basic technologies, it's gone, but I suspect we might get a few people finding that this is a bit too much new input. But 4 to 5 years, gesture-based computing and learning analytics. There's just so much opportunity that's going to come out of particularly gesture-based computing that will be really interesting. So remember that. If you're in a comfort zone, get out of it, because the world isn't comfortable any longer. It's exciting, it's interesting, but it is a world that's rapidly changing. And I think there's lots happening. I love this image of a fractal. You can either see this image as things imploding into the center, or you can see it as the expanding universe. Take your pick. But there's new tools and new opportunities, and I think but there are some principles. I do think we need to look carefully at negotiating educational beliefs. I think that teachers will, my experience of my enthusiasm often going slightly wrong, is that if you, certainly me as a staff developer, try and push something without enough persuasive evidence, which comes back to research, comes back to that evidence being out in the international arena, that people can then negotiate and think about and change. Beliefs can change, but they don't change overnight. I think we need to focus on learning design, which is the skeleton, if you like. And then I think we need to really think about authentic interactive tasks. And remember, we're focusing on those critical literacies, those digital literacies that students actually need. Not so much the content, more the capabilities. I think teachers and students need to work together. We've had a couple of nice examples of that today. I think it has to be seen as a mutual comfort zone that's shifting. And I think it should be fun. As soon as it gets too hard, do something else. It's not worth, life's short. And it should be like it's fun. I mean, it was great listening to Ben and his computer science stuff today. He's obviously having a ball. And that's what people should be doing. And so I continue. So thank you very much. I'm hoping there's some nasty questions for me. Or challenging, shall we say, not nasty. Courtesy is one of those big things. Questions?
Thank you very much for the very insightful and thought-provoking presentation. My question is, I've been to some of the computer-assisted language learning conferences, and some skeptics, like they put forward some issue or something like this. With the emerging technologies, maybe they fear that one day teachers may become irrelevant.
Oh no.
What's your...
No. Remember, well, I'm never going to become irrelevant. Remember, we're the learning designers. The technology isn't, you're not going to be able to plug somebody into, I tried learning Cantonese. Now, you can all laugh. It is sort of pathetic. So this lady well over 50 comes to Hong Kong. You've already lost the top registers of hearing. And my husband and I sat in the evening with these wretched, CDs and headphones and so on. And it was an abject failure. I went out down the market and had a few conversations, and so I now know what's called taxi Cantonese, and I can get around a bit. But, my own experience of languages in several contexts has been it's when I'm talking to people, interacting with people, and so on. Now, sure, the fine nuance of pronunciation and this and that and the other, useful. But in the end, learning is a human activity. And learners need to be motivated. And I don't believe language learners are going to be motivated by a computer lab. It's just, it's going to support them, but it's not going to be the thing that motivates and drives them. And so again, that's why we use the term blended learning, which I used to think sounded a bit like a milkshake, but it really is the answer. Now, I know we have totally online courses, and there are some situations where that's the only form available, but it's tough. It's hard to build a learning community online. So I think, no, I think your jobs are secure, folks. Don't worry. Yeah.
Hi, Carmel. Ben Leong from SOC, the NUS School of Computing. No, I'm not going to ask about the control group thing. I just want to go back to your slide whereby you showed two bars, right? One bar is the students claiming that using more of those technologies can do better, and there's the other bar that shows that nobody's doing it, right?
This one?
This one, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So my question is, how do you know the students know better? Okay, because my sense...
that's not showing you that. That's just showing you yellow is what they do.
Yeah, correct.
And red and blue is what they would like to do.
But the point is, the assumption in this slide seems to suggest that the students actually know better, right? Which frankly, I don't really think so. Okay, and another thing that I want to highlight is that the fact that these guys aren't using the tools that you have available is not necessarily a sign that something's broken. Okay, so I did the game thing, right? And the truth is that NUS is actually pretty advanced. We have the IBLE, we have a pretty advanced e-learning support system. But I built everything from scratch, right? And the main reason, well, one reason is I can. But besides that, the whole point is that, as you have shown in the earlier kind of flow chart, right? The teaching comes first. And what I did was I figured out how to do teaching. And we built the entire system to support the teaching.
Yep.
So the challenge here really is that the existing tools do not actually fit very well, okay? Which is why we actually went to build everything, and my system is kind of fully integrated. Everything is and it's fully integrated into the whole syllabus, so you can't just take it out, right? If you pluck out the thing, basically the whole thing collapses. So we have successfully done that, but the reason why we can do that is because we built the darn thing.
Yeah, I know, but you're a special...
Right.
He's a programmer, folks, okay?
No.
I understand your question. Your question's a very good one. There's two questions, if I understand correctly. The two questions are, one, I'm asserting, which is true, that the students know what they need, and secondly, that the tools are available that would fit teachers' needs. Okay, now let me address both of them. I think the point I'm trying to make is that students are well disposed to actually using technology. They are somewhat depressed by going into most of the classrooms, even though some of them look reasonable. They just find this is like they've been doing this for all their secondary school and primary school, and can't we do something a little different? There's that sense that this is a step back. So, because a lot of teachers say to me, if I use technology and innovate, then my course evaluation scores will go down. And, you know, the course evaluation scores in Hong Kong are just ridiculously powerful. And I'm trying to say to them, no, the students want to actually engage in more experiment with you. All right, so that's really that point. It's not so much that the students know what they need, it's just that the students are well disposed to try things. I've got evidence from our best teachers, in other words, the ones that get the highest teaching evaluations, they quite actively use technology where it's appropriate. So that's what that bit's about. The thing about the tools, well, they're a lot better than they used to be. And I accept what you're saying. I think that's where institutionally, again, Chinese U is probably like NUS. It has quite a good team of support staff. So if anyone at my university wants a young sort of computer science graduate to go over and hold their hand while they learn how to use whatever it is, then we can actually do you know, in the office of the teacher. We have enough staff for that. So I think the tools aren't too bad. I think even if I look at a boring LMS, we could do more with it than is currently used. So we can't all be programmers. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I'm just saying that the tools may not be sufficient, and for me, I didn't think some of the tools are good enough for me, so I didn't use them.
Yeah.
But fundamentally, I think the thing that I'm trying to say is that I think sometimes there's a tendency to prescribe the use of IT tools. And it's funny coming from me because I'm a computer scientist. But the truth is that I think there are different, not everything is a nail. I mean, if you hammer, everything looks like a nail, but the truth is that sometimes it's not.
It's just that I just think we could do better than one of the ways in which young teachers at our university can fulfill their requirements for professional development, the assignment part of it, is to go through a process of video consultation. So one of their lectures is videoed, and then they have a consultation with a clear professor. And so I have now seen hundreds of hours of Chinese U classes, and I think we could do better. I think also the dean of one of our faculties, new dean, he's lovely, I like him. He went around the classrooms of his faculty and popped in the back. And then after having surveyed them, you know, like a lot, he spent several days doing this. He then wrote an open letter to the faculty telling them that it was about time they moved into the 21st century and had slightly better classes. Now, it comes from the dean. That's quite powerful. So, look, you know, we can always do better, yeah. And I think technology is part of that equation, yeah. Okay, any other? Yeah, Laura.
Just to follow up on that, I think you're absolutely right that we can do better with what we have. And if I think of 7 years ago when we were looking for a new learning management system, the students all said to us, could you please have by default a discussion board in every single course? That's all we want. Then the professors can do what they want. They wanted discussions as limited and as primitive as the tools were 7 years ago, you can imagine. They wanted that, they knew it, they used it, and that drove the professors to start to do more interesting things, to then want to request where we've just chosen a new system, and the focus on what was needed for the discussions and the collaboration had taken off by leaps and bounds. So I think that even with very primitive tools, you can do a lot if you have an attitude. And there were some professors who didn't want discussion boards, so the students would use discussion boards in other courses to talk about that. So they'll figure out what works.
Yeah. And they don't necessarily have to use the university systems, but there should be opportunities that for those sorts of interactions to be seen as part of the formal education. Otherwise, we end up with the social interaction space, which is very powerful, not merging into what, and again, this idea that came up very early this morning of community, that the idea that there is a campus community, and that there's a merging between formal and informal learning. We've just re-engineered a lot of our just ordinary spaces around the campus to make them into informal learning spaces. And I think that sort of process is part of it. Yep. I think we're probably questioned out, right? Okay, cool. Well, thank you very much, everyone. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Mcnaught. Could you just remain on stage for a little while?
Okay.
I'd like to invite Prof. Lim to come up on stage to present a token of appreciation to Professor Mcnaught.
Okay. We're supposed to shake hands and smile. Thank you. Thank you very much. Oh, this is nice. It's a book. It's a book. It's not an e-book.
Actually, it's a book written by Professor Tan.
Oh,
Professor
okay.
Tan Tai-yong, yeah.
Yeah, oh, excellent. Okay, good. I also believe in, I've just built a house that's got a library. Now, listen, folks. It's got one of those ladders that that go along. See, everyone's jealous. You can't get digital libraries with ladders. Yeah. Thank you.